Welcome back. Well, borders are closing around the world. Ours here tonight at 9 p.m. Sydney time as governments attempt to limit the spread of coronavirus. Countries who have often worked together in times of crisis are now segregating themselves, demonstrating that the concept of sovereignty trumps globalists at times like this. Joining me now for our Friday panel, Sky News host of Outsiders, Rowan Dean, and Executive Director of the IPA, John Roscombe, here in Melbourne. I'll start with you if I can, please, Rowan. Rita Panahi, your co-host on Outsiders, wrote a terrific column today, really taking China to task. She says their ineptitude, their dishonesty and their recklessness allowed this get way worse than it needed to be, and their partner in crime in all of this, she says, was the World Health Organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Rita's written a terrific piece on that and in the Herald Sun. And we really have to, as she says, hold China's feet to the fire. If it were a company or if it were an individual, but certainly if it were a company that had caused such worldwide damage, other countries would be asking reparations. They would be coming after them for, we saw after the World Wars, we saw reparations. The damage that China has willfully inflicted upon the entire world, firstly, and let's be absolutely crystal clear, this is an inevitable consequence of communism and totalitarianism. First of all, they tried to shut it up and suppress those individuals who were sounding the alarm, even to the extent of locking up one of the doctors who'd sounded the alarm. He later died. Whether he, as Rita says, whether he died of the virus or not is a matter of speculation, but he later died. So this is communism at its height: suppress the information, then panic afterwards, and then try and attribute the blame to the states, which is just laughable. China must be held to account for this, and countries around the world have to start looking at their relationships with China in the light of this disaster.
John, when we closed our borders to Chinese, particularly Wuhan, Hubei residents very early on, the Chinese ambassador in Australia was highly critical of our measures. Other countries had adopted those measures. Are we all scared of China because they knew how bad this was, yet criticised us for trying to protect our own?
And that was clearly, Peter, part of their propaganda effort. There's nothing that President Trump has said about what's happened in China in relation to the virus that I think is wrong. The Australian government acted correctly. It acted correctly in relation to banning and quarantining foreign students in Australian universities. And to touch on Rowan's point, which I think is absolutely correct and is now the subject of a really interesting and active debate in the US about the role of Chinese-American trade relations, the supply chain issues that American companies rely on. Americans have been surprised, for example, to discover that 45% of their penicillin comes from China. So this has got huge geopolitical trade ramifications.
Yeah, Rowan, this is an important point. I've made it a couple of times this week in my editorials. We have to learn some big lessons out of this.
Yeah, and you mentioned the World Health Organization, WHO, who Rebecca Weiser wrote a terrific piece in The Spectator Australia about their role in assisting China in downplaying the Chinese involvement and responsibility for all of this. So this character who heads up the World Health Organization has been in the pocket of the Chinese all along. He's been downplaying it, completely against what the World Health Organization was set up to do. Completely counter to everything that body is supposed to do. Again, an individual who should be held to account, and an organization that we really have to look at and go, what on earth are we doing with an organization like that being responsible to this extent? This is going to change a lot of things, but it also, Peter, we really need to look at ourselves as a country. Why aren't we manufacturing things? Why are we letting China manufacture stuff? Why aren't we bringing the jobs home? Why aren't we being more self-sufficient? That's the big discussion.
Well, that's got to be the takeout after all of the crisis has passed. But, John, Alan Jones spoke to the Prime Minister on Radio 2GB in Sydney today, and he put it to the Prime Minister, if all of these Australian businesses go belly up, that they are at threat, what happens when the Chinese money swoops in, as it has in recent years, and tries to buy them up? Are we going to say no? And the Prime Minister pointed to FIRB and all these other things. What do you say about that?
Well, I'll always support free trade and foreign investment, but the rules have now been turned on their head. And this is exactly the debate Australia has to have. And to go to Rowan's point, why aren't we making things here anymore? Because Australia literally has the world's highest minimum wage. We have amongst the world's highest power prices. We have an industrial relations system that absolutely mitigates against a manufacturing industry. And we have to have this discussion, and we need to be very aware of what is going to happen afterwards. We can have free trade, but it is absolutely appropriate for the Australian government and all governments around the world in now their relations with China to say anything you can do in this country, we need to be able to do in China. And that hasn't yet happened.
And we're going to have this debate in Australia. There's no doubt about that. John Roscombe and the wonderful Rowan Dean. We'll watch you on Sunday. Thanks very much for your time.